Good morning. Good morning. If you could please take your seat. Your table number is on your name tag in the bottom left. Please find your seat. Breakfast will be served shortly. Good morning. Hello. I see so many faces that are brought to life this morning and not just a tiny little box on my screen. So thank you all so much for being here. It means so much, and what a celebratory day. My name is Megan Phillip. I am the Executive Director of the Healthcare Council of Chicago. And today is our International Women's Day Forum. I just want to point out a couple of things. There might be a young blonde lady, Jessica, who has helped in many a Zoom webinar that you never saw her face, but she's here today, even though she actually doesn't live here in Chicago, but she will have an iPhone and taking pictures. So don't think that someone's just being random. So I just want to give you that heads up. Over the past 5 years, HC3 has evolved into a mission-driven platform convening Chicago's healthcare leaders and stakeholders to address issues and barriers that our industry faces. And we proactively seek uncommon alignment to improve Chicago's healthcare ecosystem through the lens of our 3 pillars: addressing health and social disparities, economic development, and system transformation. We seek this primarily through our activities, which are our programs like today, our initiatives, and our collaborations and partnerships. Our activities are driven by the idea that we collectively can do this together and we can really change our city and our systems. We still have a long way to go, but I remain optimistic and of these critical conversations and efforts that many of you are underway, and how we can uncover the root causes and barriers that exist within our systems, the willingness that we all have to listen, engage, and think differently about how we can move forward together. So in January, we kicked off 2022 with a series of virtual discussions around the role of women in healthcare. Women make up 3/4 of the healthcare workforce, and yet in 2018, there were only 5 women at the helm of 50 of the largest nonprofit health systems in the US. The pandemic represented a real-time example of leadership, and today we have an opportunity to recognize and celebrate incredible leaders that have inspired us and led us through it all. Hosting this series has been an important opportunity for us to provide a platform to elevate and champion incredible women that are addressing issues that matter, challenging the status quo, and making Chicago healthier and a better community. Before we dive into the program, I also want to just share some additional gratitude to some folks. First, I want to recognize our sponsors: the American Medical Association, Alight Solutions Group, and Third Horizon Strategies. We are super grateful for your generous contributions to today's event and recognize the importance and relevancy of celebrating International Women's Day within the healthcare ecosystem. I also want to thank my colleagues and my friends at Third Horizon Strategies that helped me in various ways behind the scenes, including Jessica, as well as Caleb, Heba, Jordana, Ashley, Lawanda, Sarah, Dashid, and David. All of these folks have been with me for the past 2 years virtually, and it's really great to have some of them here today in this room. And last but not least, I am so grateful for my colleague and co-creator of this series, Lori McGraw. It has been a privilege in and of itself to work with such a passionate and inspirational female leader in our industry. So without further ado, I'd like to now invite Lori McGraw, Senior Vice President at the American Medical Association and host of Inspiring Women with Lori McGraw podcast, to come up and share her thoughts.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Isn't it nice to be out without a mask on, in person, to be fully dressed, to have shoes on, as well as hair and makeup, like the whole kit and caboodle back together again. It is so great to see everyone. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you for being here. I do have a few comments, and let me start with: women have always been powerful, but today's a celebration, and today is a day that we celebrate women. Why do we celebrate women? We celebrate women, and we have International Women's Day as a time where we can imagine a gender equal world, one that is free of bias, free of stereotypes, free of discrimination. It's one where diversity, equity, and inclusivity is part of what is every day, where as a woman, as a senior leader, you are not having a conversation about once again being the only woman at a particular table, but where tables where all women are welcome. That is why we celebrate today. Women have always been powerful. We are mothers, we are caretakers, we are leaders, we are people who care and who work deliberately to make a better world. And that is what we are celebrating today. In 2018, McKinsey put out a Women in Work study. This is a typical study that they put out. I read it in 2019, and that study told me something, statistics that we actually know. Statistics which said basically in the past 10 years of women in professional work, we actually haven't made a lot of progress. In fact, we've made almost zero progress. Today, women still are 82 cents to the dollar. Today, women still are infrequent members in the boardrooms. Today, women still are infrequently the leaders of venture-backed companies or CEOs or things of that nature. And it's changing, and that is wonderful. And we celebrate that. But during this past 2 years of this terrible and horrific pandemic, we've lost quite a bit of ground as women. We've actually gone back to levels of 1988 in terms of the time in terms of women in the workplace. We've lost 3 decades of progress. And yes, there are issues. There are systemic issues. There are things that we must address, but celebrating, being with each other, giving voice, networking, being around other leaders, and for all the men in this audience, the allies, the supporters, I thank you for being here. Your support means everything for the work that we are all doing together. I wanted to talk for a minute about, Megan mentioned that I started a year ago, the Inspiring Women podcast. Why? Because when I read that Women at Work study from McKinsey, it bothered me. It bothered me. I am a woman leader. I am an accomplished woman leader. I am proud of the work that I do every day at the American Medical Association and other things, but I felt I could do more. And I felt that by talking to other women and just giving voice to the stories, that was one thing that I could do. So I started talking to women. My first podcast was with Chelsea Paga, my daughter, who's here in the audience today. I wanted to talk to young women. I wanted to talk to them. What are the questions that they had? She has questions. How do I negotiate for what I want? How do I negotiate for what I deserve? I wanted to talk to mid-stage women like Sumi Petroda, who is also here today, episode 15. She just become a new leader at the American Medical Association, and she too had questions. How do I balance being a mother as well as wanting to do an excellent job as a leader and a manager? I spoke to incredibly accomplished women like Dr. Suzette McKinney, who is our keynote this morning. And I will read you her background. It's 20 pages. I only have a minute, but incredibly accomplished. She too had questions. It was not gifted to her to be the leader that she is today, and she still works hard every day to further lead, to be a woman of stature, and to be a role model for all of us to know that we too can look like that and be like that and give voice to the accomplishments, not just for women, but for all people. It is my view that women in leadership aim to make this world a better place. Today is International Women's Day. It is a celebration. Before we go right into our program, part of the program is meeting each other, is being with each other. I want to take 1 minute and have everyone stand up and say hello to someone you haven't met before. That's part of the program. We're going to take that minute right now. And we'll come back and we'll come back and we'll come back. And we'll come back and we'll come back. And we'll come back and we'll come back and we'll come back. And we're going to come back and we're going to come back and we're going to come back. Here we go, doing great. Some people are overachieving on the networking 1 minute. I just want to point that out. We actually will have time for another networking break during the course of the program. We also will be attentive to the time. We know that all of you have busy schedules, and so we aim to end at 10 o'clock. Today, some of us will be around. Megan also mentioned that this is an event, International Women's Day, that was a series of programs. And I want to thank Megan and the HC3 team for putting on this program. We started off with a series. We talked to women leaders in the area of innovation. We did that coincided with the JP Morgan event in healthcare. Missy Krasner, Alyssa Jaffe, Kristen Valdez, Adamika Arthur. We also spoke to women leaders in healthcare delivery. We spoke to Dr. Bobby Byrne, Dr. Cheryl Rucker-Whitaker, and Dr. Kathy Demoo from Cigna, who is here with us today. Kathy, thank you so much for being here. We talked to women leaders who were in community service. We talked to Aisha Jaco of Westside United, Linda Exalti Tortello of Mujeres Latinas en Acción. And we talked to Selma Sims, who is also here, the CEO of Gardeneers, who is just an exceptional leader, helping to bring fresh food to individuals. And I have told this statistic that I learned from Selma in terms of her work, which is so astounding to me. The children, teenagers that she serves are eating one healthy portion of vegetables every week, which is more than they have before. So Selma, I just want to congratulate you on your work. It was really, I was inspired speaking to you. Today, we're going to kick off our amazing program. We're going to speak to a number of leaders in public health with our panel, but we're going to start with our keynote, which is Dr. Suzette McKinney. I'm not kidding how much I have to say about Dr. McKinney. But let me just briefly say, Dr. McKinney, she's a public health expert. She's a medical executive. She is a thought leader, a strategic thinker, nationally recognized expert in emergency preparedness and response. Today, She is the principal and director of life sciences for Sterling Bay, where she oversees relationships with scientific, academic, corporate, tech, government sectors, all involved in the life sciences ecosystem, which she's absolutely building here in Chicago, but also nationally. Previously, she was the CEO and executive director for the Illinois Medical District, a vast network of hospitals, incubators, facilities, which was managed 24 by 7 by 365. In 2020, she's coming up here because she wants me to stop. I'm not stopping. Dr. McKinney, which was appointed by Governor Pritzker as the operations lead for the state of Illinois alternate care facilities, which is over the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to all of these things, she also has a history as a public health leader and advisor. She's on numerous boards, numerous advisory committees, numerous task forces, and she still has time to be a teacher, to be a professor, and to be a mother. And I am excited to have Dr. McKinney speaking us today on International Women's Day. Dr. McKinney, thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you, Lori. You have no idea how embarrassing it is to have someone like read all of your history. But Lori, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. It is so great to be here with all of you today. I'm so excited to be here for so many reasons. First, as an optimist and a self-described extrovert, I'm excited because it's the Healthcare Council's first in-person event since 2020, and that is an accomplishment. I can't tell you, yes, thank you, that's great. I can't tell you how satisfying it feels to be here and see all of your smiling faces today and have the opportunity to interact with you all face to face. I'm also excited because going to events in person, it's good for us, right? As a public health professional, I'd just like to point out that social interaction is essential to our health. We've all experienced extreme amounts of disruption, stress, and maybe even a little bit of trauma over these past 2 years. So I'm so happy that finally we are able to be back together again, back to the useful and very healthy practice of having in-person functions. And I hope that this reprieve from the stronghold that the pandemic has had on all of us will last us for a while. And finally, I'm honored to be here following the first 3 programs in this series on the role of women in healthcare, which featured so many women that I know and respect and admire. And I'm in illustrious company today with the amazing women that you will hear from later when they all join me on a panel discussion following this talk. So today we're here to celebrate women in healthcare, our career journeys, how we can attain leadership roles, and how we can collectively create more equitable pathways for women who have a voice in providing access to healthcare. And most significantly, we're here during Women's History Month on International Women's Day. There's some irony in all of this, because as Lori alluded to, the historical inequalities that women have faced, not just in healthcare, but in every field and every profession, have been laid bare by the coronavirus, especially pay disparities. Just how much less we earn varies by a few cents depending on who's reporting it. But in the first quarter of 2022, data from the US Census Bureau showed that US women are still earning about 30% less than men. Excuse me, and that pay gap increases with age. More disturbingly, in the healthcare field, where many women earn very respectable wages, those disparities can still be quite large. Over an entire career, the discrepancies can add up to millions of dollars. A survey of more than 80,000 physicians published in December by the Journal of Health Affairs, the largest analysis done to date on physician salaries, and the first one to estimate the cumulative impact of the pay gap in medicine, found that female doctors make about 25% less than their male counterparts, starting from their very first day on the job, even as a resident. In fact, Male resident salaries average $17,000 higher than their female counterparts, according to a 2021 study in the Annals of Internal Medicine. So just think about that. Over a 40-year career, that translates to women physicians earning an average of $2 million less than men. And even though pay gaps across all industries have narrowed in the past few decades, when the New York Times reported the results of this survey, they also noted that the gender wage gap is wider in healthcare than in many other professional industries. I can tell you I wasn't thinking about any of that as a young girl when I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in medicine, neonatology specifically. I am a product of Chicago Public Schools, and I'm just going to ask you all to applaud for that, because Lord knows that our kids in Chicago Public Schools have had a rough go during this pandemic. But I will tell you, I grew up in South Shore on the south side of the city. I went to school on the west side, having graduated from Whitney Young High School. So I don't know how many of you caught that. The south side, the west side. If you listen to the narrative about the parts of our city that need the most help, it's always the south side and the west side. Those are the areas that raised me. So by all accounts, I probably wasn't supposed to make it, but I was persistent. At the end of my second year in college, I received a fellowship from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, designed to get undergraduate students interested in scientific research. So at 19 years old, I was thrown into a microbiology lab full of PhD students and postdocs at Brandeis University. On my first day, they looked at me and they basically said, "We don't give a damn that you're an undergrad. If you're gonna be in here with us, you have to work like we do." So I persisted. And that's when I began my circuitous path to where I am today. It was the beginning of my path. So remember that for later. I had every intention of going to medical school, but upon graduation, I decided to pursue graduate studies in public health and spend a year working in the field before going to medical school. I thought that some experience in public health would make me a better clinician. Upon graduation, I started looking for a public health position where I thought I'd spend my time learning about how to conduct epidemiological investigations or how to improve community health. That was in June of 2001. And 3 months later, 9/11 happened. 1 month after that, we had the anthrax attacks. And not long after that, I landed my first job in public health as the bioterrorism regional coordinator for the city of Chicago. So here I was, a young 20-something, without a full understanding of the magnitude of the role that I had just stepped into, responsible for helping to develop our city's medical countermeasure distribution plans in the event of a major biological attack on our city, and working with all of the local health departments in the larger Chicago metropolitan area to ensure that their plans aligned with the city's plans. And I can admit, I was not sure what that meant in the beginning, but I persisted. Well, needless to say, what was supposed to be 1 year in public health turned into 2 years. And let's see, that was 2002, and here we are in 2022, and I'm still going. It has indeed been a circuitous path. But I remember the joy and the excitement that I felt when I decided, instead of going to medical school, I would go back to graduate school to pursue my doctorate in public health. I also remember the shock that I felt when a female colleague told me that I didn't have what it took to be a doctor, and that I should just stop trying to keep up with the guys. I didn't get angry or discouraged. I persisted. I experienced a meteoric rise at CDPH, and in case you don't know, nothing moves super fast in government. When I was up for one of my earlier promotions, a female leader didn't hesitate to go to the hiring manager to say to her that she shouldn't hire me because, well, you know, Suzette's a good worker bee, but she's not a leader. She had no evidence for this statement. It was merely her opinion. Okay, fine, have your opinion. I will persist. I will say I thought about her 2 years later when I had her job. Well, I finished my doctorate degree in 2009, a full, long 5 years of working full-time at CDPH, part-time doctoral studies, being a wife, a mother, et cetera, you know how it goes. 3 months later, we saw the onset of H1N1, and there I was, thrust into the responsibility for leading our city's response. Terrifying would be an understated description of what it felt like, but I persisted. That response lasted over a year, and 4 years later, I was leading another response of national significance, Ebola. Again, terrified, but I persisted. I found my work in public health fascinating. My job had lots of mystery, intrigue, drama, required a working knowledge of psychology at times, demographics, strategy, policy, and even hard science. But by the time Ebola ended in 2015, I realized I was ready for a new challenge. And before long, I would get a call asking me to consider the role of CEO of the Illinois Medical District. So when I got to the IMD, I found myself in the midst of a perfect storm of public health, healthcare, real estate, finance, big business deals, and politics, all rolled into one entity. And as in most high pressure, high profile situations, things didn't always go my way. But again, I persisted. By my 4th year at the district, we were working to develop a life sciences innovation park in the IMD. And because I was changing the zoning in the district and unlocking stagnated development opportunities, I began getting requests for meetings from literally every major developer in the city, except for Sterling Bay. Now, by this point, I was tired of just being persistent, and I decided to turn up the heat a bit. So Sterling Bay wasn't calling me, so I called them. After being granted a meeting, I marched into their offices and I told them all the reasons why they should be developing a life science facility in the Illinois Medical District. An hour after that meeting, they called me and they asked me to come back. So I went back, and then they told me that I should come there and work for them and lead their life sciences division. So obviously I did. Given the many issues that we face today, from the health and wealth gap to the many issues laid bare by the pandemic, from hybrid work to the need for new healthcare strategies for every demographic, I knew that development would be a very exciting field. The real estate demands for both new and expanding life sciences companies are outstripping the supply all over the country. The healthcare field is at the forefront of this growth in this new post-COVID world. And it also offers new challenges to solve and new markets to conquer. So this gave me the opportunity to lead in a different way. And if you know me, you know I'm always up for new challenges. My goal every single day is to just be better than I was the day before. So now I'm working to raise Chicago as a major life sciences market and to expand my company's life sciences footprint nationally. But what's the moral of the story here? First, it's that leadership is a journey, not a destination. Getting there takes grit, it takes self-determination, and most importantly, it takes time. If I had to identify important takeaways from my own career trajectory, there would be 2 that are overriding. Number 1, amplify what you know, and know that you don't always have to wait for the proverbial door to open. There may come a time when you just have to kick it down. But we all face daily obstacles that need to be addressed and resolved. And I've learned that no matter how accomplished you are or how much you achieve, you still need to work hard at developing your leadership acumen to continuously grow as a leader. Again, leadership is a journey. It's not a destination. As women, Regardless of color, we must still work harder and be better to get to where we want to go. For women, mediocrity is not an option. So think about where you are now. Your leadership journey has had its beginning, and now you're on your path. Perhaps you've had some challenges along your way. We all have. But I'd also bet that you've had some accomplishments. So what I would ask of you is to think about those accomplishments in relation to where you want to go. Don't make apologies for your goals. Pursue them enthusiastically. And by all means, don't ever shrink who you are to make someone else feel better about themselves. And finally, just go out there and kick some doors down. I could have said another word in there, but I decided not to. So with that, happy International Women's Day to all of you. Thank you. Am I staying? No? Okay.
Let's give another round for Suzette. That was amazing. We're going to take a 10-minute break so you can get up and stretch and do a little networking. And when we come back, we'll have our panel of lady experts. Hello again. If everyone could take your seats, we'll get started with our panel. So if I can invite the panelists to come on up. And for the second time today, I'm going to hand it off to Lori McGraw.
Thank you, Megan. And I have this mic. I'm going to double mic it for a second. So terrific. Well, thank you, Suzette, for those great comments. That was a great way for us to kick off. I also want to congratulate this entire audience. You do excellent at networking. So A+ on that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into a panel discussion. I'm going to introduce our additional panelists in addition to Suzette to talk about two thematic topics as public health officials, their role as leaders, as women leaders in both crisis leadership during the course of this pandemic, which we are still not out of, but hopefully starting to ease out of, as well as talk about some of the thematic issues of recovery and what that begins to look like. But then we also want to hone in on questions around as leaders, as women leaders, what does that look like? The path to get there? Do some of the things that are often attributed to women in the challenges of becoming leaders, do they still exist today? So we'll go into some of those types of stories. We have time for questions. So I just, the part of this, being together is the opportunity to interact. So we want to leave plenty of time to that. Okay, let me tell you who our incredible panelists are. We have Dr. Allison Arwady. Dr. Allison Arwady, who is the commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health, and she has been the face for Chicago during the course of the pandemic. I don't know if you've seen her on Facebook, the Ask Me Anything, just the constant awareness and education. She started at the Chicago Department of Public Health in 2015 and became the commissioner in January 2020. January 2020. So let's imagine for 1 second what that looks like. We have Dr. Susan Bailey. Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. Dr. Susan Bailey, who is an allergist and an immunologist from Fort Worth, Texas. She is the immediate past president of the American Medical Association. And in addition to being the president of the American Medical Association, she has been in organized medicine her entire career, 30 years as a practicing physician in private practice. And the AMA, as an association that is 175 years old, Dr. Bailey is the 6th only female president of the AMA. Dr. Bailey, we're so happy to have you here. National leader for us during the course of this pandemic. And then also on our panel, we have Dr. Ngozi Ezike, who is the director of the Illinois Department of Public Health. And she, for the state of Illinois, has been the leader in terms of managing this crisis. She has been the first Black woman appointed to lead this 143-year-old state agency. She is a board certified internist and pediatrician, and recently announced that after 3 years, she'd been in the job 1 year and then this pandemic. And I just want to say that for Governor Pritzker, who was recently talking about Dr. Ezike's leadership, not only has she been the face for the state of Illinois, but the thousands of people that Governor Pritzker credits her with saving their lives due to her leadership for protecting the health and well-being of the people. I would like us to take a moment for our panelists who are public servants, who have led us through this crisis, this pandemic, not just their leadership, their service. We thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll actually get into the panel. I thought it would be wonderful for us to hear from each of our additional panelists, just a little bit about their roles as public health leaders. We have it at both the local level of Chicago, we have it as the state level for Illinois, we have it at the national level. Each of these women leaders have been the voice of science, the voice of education, the voices that we've looked to when we were confused, when we were starting out. So if we can just start, maybe Dr. Awadi, if you could just start and just tell us, what have you been doing for the past 2 years?
You know, chilling, right? So, yes, so I was confirmed by City Council as commissioner 4 days before the Chicago Department of Public Health activated for COVID, when we started screening folks at the airport, coming from China. And then we had our first case here, second in the US, within 2 weeks. And so when I think back on these last 2 years, it certainly was not something that I anticipated, but it was something that I knew I was trained to do. And I felt like from the beginning, the need to, even if we didn't have all the answers, because we definitely did not, I had spent most of my career thinking about public health, thinking about outbreaks, really committed to how do you protect a health system at a time of stress. And I think there were 2 things right from the beginning that we were thinking about. One was, how do you build some calm into what can be a lot of crazy, sort of at the city level? And we made the decision early on to just start getting out there, right? Typically in government as leaders, we tend to be pretty scripted. Always before COVID, I would have my remarks written out and double checked by, everybody in the mayor's office. Well, there was not time for any of that. And so right away from the beginning, started having to be out there on a daily basis, and had to really recognize that taking questions directly from the public, being out, there must be thousands of hours of me now recorded for all time, which can sometimes make people a little nervous, right? But I felt it was more important just to take what we did know, be honest about what we were learning, and try to guide around that. And the other thing is just my team. Public health likes to run under the radar usually. We're not ones looking for the spotlight. And I knew, from H1N1, from Ebola, it's a big stressor on a health department, even a medium-sized outbreak. And recognizing that I needed to keep my team together and supported when everybody was doing 2 and 3 jobs. I'd say both that sort of external facing, and then the really with my team, I spend as much time thinking about that as I do the external piece. And I'll just finish by saying I'm probably one of the few people in Chicago who actually had to upgrade my wardrobe when COVID started, because I used to, just occasionally have to be out there. And, I haven't had a chance to work from home at any point, like throughout all this, and recognizing that you've got to make decisions, that are for public health, but also in collaboration with folks at the mayor's office, on the economic teams, and lots of really strong leaders, of course, in Chicago local government as well. And so happy to talk some more about that.
Great, thank you. Dr. Ziki from the state level.
Yeah, and I think, it's been quite a whirlwind. It's been very emotional 3 weeks, 4 weeks as I'm thinking about not being in this role. So pardon just the emotional fluctuations, but it's been quite an experience. I think just to piggyback on so many things that Allison said, I too had to upgrade running into TJ Maxx 9:15 before the 9:30 closure to the clearance rack. Just grab all the dresses. I'll return it later. I'll just figure out what I'm wearing for tomorrow morning. But really, it's really all about the team that you assemble. And, Allison is part of the team. Like we had essentially everyone, every stakeholder was a part of the team. This wonderful person was a huge part of the team, and being able to get those people, the right people, which, you know, in public health is largely women, and having that teamwork and being able to inspire people to really push beyond the great work they were already doing. So when we think about COVID and like, oh my gosh, you must have spent all this time with COVID, I hope that people don't forget that everything else still had to be done with HIV, with other STIs, with lead abatement, you know, with making sure that our waterways are clear for people to go in. Like, none of those other 200 programs got to stop. So this, you know, COVID was just on top of, and it's on top of all these women that make the majority of the workforce, dealing with kids at home, remote learning, or dealing with family members that are catching COVID and being hospitalized. Just all of that together was what I was trying to support the team to be able to navigate all these insane challenges while doing work to try to continue to advance the safety. And so it's just been a colossal feat that we've accomplished together. It's not just the public health people, it's obviously all of our healthcare partners, it's the community-based organizations, it's individuals who heard guidance and followed it, right? It's easy to put stuff on the paper. It'd be great if you did this, it'd be great if you do that. If nobody did it, we wouldn't be where we are now. So it's just been such a collective opportunity for us to see how much we all matter and how all of us have a stake in public health. And I hope we will just remember that lesson so we can conquer so many other diseases and ills that are still plaguing us that we need continued help on.
Thank you. Dr. Bailey, from a national level, just in terms of what you saw, how you led through.
Thanks. Well, I'm in awe of my two public health colleagues here. I'm not a public health physician, but I played one on TV for the past 2 years. As the American Medical Association is the nation's largest organization of physicians. It's an elected position. And so I've been working my way up through my county medical society, my state medical society, and the AMA, you know, like Laurie said, for 30 years. And 2020 was going to be my year. That was the year that I was going to be inaugurated. I was going to become AMA president. My theme was going to be, let doctors be doctors. It was to help physicians conquer burnout, to work on payment issues, to work on the regulatory burden that physicians are faced with in practice, prior authorizations, surprise billing, all of these types of issues. And the AMA president typically travels a lot. One of my predecessors was on the road 300 days out of her 300, out of her year. And it's not just national travel. The AMA president represents the country in many international settings, the World Medical Association, as well as going to other national medical societies. And I didn't do any of that. I was inaugurated instead of a big gala in the Hyatt on the other side of the river, I think. No, same side, I guess. Black tie, dinner dance, all that kind of stuff. I was inaugurated by Zoom, and it was recorded in advance. And so I watched it on my laptop on my kitchen table with my husband and my two sons. That was quite an event. And so I have always felt, and I hope that you've experienced this in your organization, you always seem to have the right leader at the right time. And so I've thought, well, why am I here now? Why have I been dealt this hand to become the first virtual AMA president? And, but when you're played a hand, even if it's a crappy hand, you've typically got a couple of cards in there that you can play. And one card that I was able to play was that I am board certified in allergy and immunology. And even though I practice allergy on a daily basis, there's really not a lot of clinical immunology out there to take care of. But the media saw immunology and boom, I had instant credibility, which was fine. I was going to take it. And so it enabled, and plus with the media experience that I've had in the past with, other medical organizations. I felt comfortable in front of a camera and reading a teleprompter. And so I became the media spokesperson. The AMA president's always the spokesperson for the organization, the profession, but I just got to do it on TV. And so I had to learn to pivot immediately from giving in-person presentations like this, which I love so much. It was so nice to hear applause. You don't get applause on Zoom. And do it all in front, learn all the platforms. You've got to learn Zoom, but at the beginning, everybody was using something different. Some people were using Teams, some people were using, Cisco WebEx, some people were using platforms that I'd never heard of and have never used again. And so you've got to be an expert at that. I remember the first time I tried to share my slides on Zoom in the early days of my presidency. I was at I think it was the Cleveland City Club. Instead of sharing my slides, I disconnected myself from the telecast altogether. and right in the middle of my talk, I had to sign back in. So we learned how to do that. But I think women are natural at knowing how to pivot. And because many of us have had to do it at many times in our lives. But my goal was still let doctors be doctors. But it was just through a COVID lens. It was to help physicians keep their practices open, keep their employees and their patients safe, to help teach them about vaccines, because I knew that if physicians didn't understand and support the new mRNA vaccines, we would never convince our patients. So that was a big part of my presidency, was working with the CDC and the FDA to help teach physicians what they needed to do to vaccinate their patients, to help physicians get PPE, to help them get paid during the pandemic. Some physicians were busier than they'd ever been, and some physicians actually had to close their practices because a solo practice ophthalmologist with nobody coming in their office. There were some folks that just decided to hang it up and retire early, which is a tragedy to lose something when we have such a shortage of physicians. So, my public health megaphone was one that fortunately was informed by my public health colleagues. And so even though I did not have the depth of experience that I would have liked, I was able to get the word out to so many more people by, pivoting and utilizing, virtual platforms to get the message across to help take care of patients.
I think there's something to be said, and I like the comment of being the right time for the right moment. And back to your comment, Suzette, about just sort of every step along the way you persisted, which I also thought was very interesting, and probably many people can relate to. So I want to go to sort of like a personal now for our full panel. Talk a little bit about personal. So nothing could have prepared you, I don't think, for this pandemic, and yet you all persisted in the moment. But maybe each of you, and we'll just go right down the line, start with you, Suzette, could talk about the moment when perhaps you recognized that you were a leader. Like, what was that point in time where somehow you went from just being, I'm assuming, a very hard worker, someone known as smart, whatever, and then you recognized, I'm a leader?
Well, for me, I would say it was very intentional, because remember, I talked about as a young girl growing up wanting to be a physician, this specialized pediatrician, if you will. And, I grew up in the mid-70s. And so, I always tell this story. My grandmother told me there were two things she wanted me to do in life: play the piano at her church, which I never did, and become a doctor. So I just felt like, okay, well, shit, I didn't play the piano at her church. I have to become a doctor. Like, there's no other option here. And so I remember sitting in my office at CDPH and really having this internal struggle with myself, because I was making the very conscious decision to stay in public health and not go to medical school, and struggling because my grandma wants me to be a doctor, and how do I turn my back on the career that I've wanted, that I've aspired to, that I've worked toward my entire life? And so I said, you know what? Well, whatever. It is what it is. If I'm going to do it, it can't just be a job. Like, I have to be a leader. And so I took what I call, my own independent assessment. I looked at all of the like big city health departments, New York, LA, DC, here in Chicago. I looked at the CDC. I looked at HHS in Washington. Everywhere I looked, every public health entity, all of the leaders had some form of a doctorate degree. Some were MDs, but some were PhDs and DRPHs and PsyDs and all the other alphabets. And I said, okay, I get it. Everybody has a D. I got to go get a D. And that's when I again made a very conscious decision to go back to grad school and pursue my doctorate in public health. And I literally jumped right in. I remember one of my bosses was leaving, and I had been, a lot of people didn't know this, I had been doing my work and some of his work. And when he left, I stepped up to do his job in addition to my own while they worked to hire someone. And so again, it was just very intentional, always putting myself in position to lead something. It could be a meeting, it could be an initiative, whatever. I felt like I always had to position myself to be ready to lead. That's one of my mottos: stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
So did you always, in pursuing it, did you always know you could do it? I mean, we've all talked about the imposter syndrome. I hate that
Yep.
term. Hate
Yeah, I
it,
don't have
hate
that.
it, hate it. No, you
I
never
don't
had
have
it.
Nope, I don't, because I believe that as women, we can do whatever we put our minds to. Again, I'm very intentional about what I do. I don't apologize for being goal-oriented and ambitious,
Mhm.
because I just think that those are two character traits that leaders possess. And I'm determined to be a leader no matter what I do, even if it's bringing snacks to my daughter's water polo team. I'm going to lead at bringing those snacks, So no, I don't have the imposter syndrome. And I keep my sights very focused on my goals.
So I just would like to invite the entire audience afterwards to like come and rub up
Yes,
against
yes.
Suzette here to get some of that confidence. That is awesome. Dr. Ezeki, when did you sort of like know that leadership was in the blood?
I'll let you know when it happens. No, I'm actually the polar opposite of this incredible leader. And I have seen that in her, and which is why I sought her out and would just talk to me, just because she has that. And I'm the opposite. Like I have had the imposter syndrome, and had a lot of like coaching and counseling where it was actually identified for me. After hearing me, I think the first session, the counselor was like, like, here are the books you need to read. And then I read several books on the imposter. I was like, that's me. Yep. Like, does somebody interview me for these books without me knowing? Like, this is me. And so then it was, at least I was aware that this was a thing and this is what I was harboring. And then really had to, try to turn that around. And, fun fact, like, I think my name was up there and it said MD, MPH. I don't have an MPH. I have multiple doctorates in public health now, honorary ones, but I didn't come in with a traditional public health background. So that helped me to feel like, I don't belong here. And, people would say that out loud, to me, and like, you don't have the requisite experience. And so I assumed all of that, but I knew that I was smart. I knew I had worked with underserved populations that needed a voice. And I had worked with, trying to open up opportunities. I know I'd worked in jails and prisons and saw that different lens and how you work in different important settings. And so I knew I brought a lot to the table. And so I was like, okay, I am going to put those voices out of my mind and take advantage. So at least I had the wherewithal to lean in and say yes to an incredible opportunity. And so I think that's probably the first sign that I must have some kind of leadership bone to say yes to something that's not an obvious yes, but I wanted to lean in and see how I could stretch and grow my muscles in new ways to take on new things. And I'm so glad I did, because, fast forwarding 3 years into this role, my, 1,500 people that call IDPH, their family. I mean, the support and the reviews that I'm getting now are just like, I've been here 20 years, I've been here 25 years. You are the best leader that we've ever had. You have brought such unique traits. So it's just a reminder that leadership looks very different in different people. Everyone is a leader. You just have to harness your unique talents and play those up, and you can be successful and be a leader in any role. And so I'm so excited that I have learned that over this journey.
And it's just amazing that you didn't believe that you had that early on, and like, wow, did it emerge at the right moment? I'll just say. So thank you for that. Dr. Bailey.
I think I realized I was a leader when I got elected class president in the second grade. Seriously, I have always had a passion for leadership. Part of it was being a control freak. Part of it was being a little bossy. And part of it was just a real passion to be the best and make sure that things got done right. I always volunteered for the bad committees. I still, people will talk about, oh God, I hate committees. I love committees. Committees are wonderful because people get together and you see ideas exchange and stuff can grow out of them. Now, a poorly run committee meeting is hell on earth, but a good committee meeting can be a thing of beauty. But physicians are really leaders in many ways just by being physicians. It's kind of baked into our training. We are leaders of the healthcare team. We're leaders in the physician-patient relationship. We're often leaders in our communities. As women, we're often leaders of our families, and whether our husbands or spouses know it or not. And it's, and so I think it's something that we get trained, but not overtly. I think it's kind of just baked into thing. And I love that leadership bone, to say yes when it's not obvious. That's a great line. I'm going to steal that. And one thing that I also have a passion about, and this is the nerd in me, is running big meetings in a very formal parliamentary procedure environment. I have been the speaker of multiple organizations, but when I was speaker of the AMA House of Delegates, almost 600 physicians and medical students from across the country, every specialty, every demographic, you name it, it was there. And of course, they all felt exactly the same on every opinion, every little thing we talked about. And being able to corral that many people with almost that many items of business to cover in a finite period of time was so much fun. It was challenging. It was definitely jumping without a net, but one of the most gratifying, other than being AMA president, one of the most gratifying things I've done.
That's fantastic. So Dr. Awadi, did you always know you were going to be a leader? Did you grow into being a leader, or were you just bossy? So what is your story?
Well, I was the oldest of 4 children. So I think, when I was 13 years old and directing my younger siblings to run the paper route, you perhaps have a little bit of that growing up. But I think, I've always been somebody who, when I get interested in something, I care so much about it going well that I will really dive in. And I think for me, that's meant different things at different points. But quite often, if you care more than anybody else in the room, you will sort of emerge, I think, as a potential leader there. And sometimes that's meant I've been part of causes that are not the most obvious, but they're the ones that I really care about. And I think, as a doctor, when you're in medical training, you go through pretty much your whole 20s in this very hierarchical system where there are always people who know so much more than you do, and you're never going to know what that attending physician who's been there for 30 years knows. And it's interesting because you learn how to become, every month you get this new team together, right, of your interns and your students, and you're sort of have some responsibility for their education. But it's in this system where I think you can internalize that it's going to take a really long time to sort of be a leader. But for me, when I started at the Illinois Department of Public Health. That's how I first came to Chicago. And suddenly I went from being one of, I don't know, hundreds of physicians in a big academic medical system to being one of 2 doctors, right, in this 1,500 person organization. And recognizing that there wasn't really somebody to just ask or to look to, and that I actually had skills and expertise that were needed, and that I could trust that training and, know that I was bringing something to the table that was very much needed. And I think as long as I've had that, it's not been hard for me to pull the team together. I'm not a very hierarchical person, and so I kind of fit a little better, I think, in public health. But for me, it's recognizing that people are always good leaders, I think, if in their space, if it is the right space for them, and helping define spaces like for your team too, so that together you're all working toward the goal. And I think about, before COVID, one of the stated goals of the Chicago Department of Public Health was to raise our public health voice. We felt like, people didn't know what public health was. They don't fund it. There's not an expectation. And that was something I wanted to do even before COVID. And so when this came, it's been terrible, but boy, everybody knows what epidemiology is now. People know what public health is. And recognizing that moment of sort of opportunity to say, here is the work that most people didn't even know existed because it hasn't been in the spotlight, and willing to kind of step up in that moment.
I love these really different stories and paths to leadership. And also it was really interesting, all of you talked about the team. It's not just the individual, it's the team that you're with and how important that is. I wanted to just talk about the pandemic a little bit. We're not done, but here we are without masks, and my gosh, doesn't that feel good for a moment? So in each of your viewpoints, as we come out of this pandemic, and who knows how long that will be, what is it going to take we have exposed a broken system. We've exposed the diversity and the health inequity issues. They've been laid bare, to use your words, Suzette. What will it take for economic recovery? How can we build a better system that has inclusivity, that recognizes health inequities, that addresses those things? What do you think is in the future? How do we need to repair as we come out? And maybe we'll just go down the line again,
Sure.
Suzette, if you wouldn't mind.
One of the first things that you learn when you go to public health school is that you can never solve big, complex public health problems alone. It requires what we call a systems approach. What that means is that it requires all of us. So in whatever profession you're in, whatever industry you're working in, whatever your role is, you have to actually look for opportunities to do your part for solving these issues around inequality, or at least begin to turn the tide of change. Again, everyone is not going to have the authority to change a policy, to write a new law, to implement a new practice, but there's something that we can all do in every aspect of our lives. I will tell you that prior to going to Sterling Bay, when I was at the Illinois Medical District, this whole concept of building a life sciences innovation park was born out of this issue of inequality. And we were just deeply in the throes. Catherine is over here. She was at Rush, so she remembers the early days of Westside United when we were examining that 16-year difference in life expectancy if you live on the West Side versus downtown, and trying to figure out what we could all do as large institutions. I was building a life sciences innovation park because I knew that 40% of life sciences jobs only require a high school diploma or GED. So I felt like, well, I can't change all of inequality. I can build this life sciences innovation park. And for all of those positions that don't require a PhD or some other advanced level degree, I can target all that hiring,
to West Side residents, and I can do my part to change their health outcomes indirectly through their economic outcomes. So it's about figuring out what you can do in the space that you occupy. And I believe that that's what it's going to take.
So you are talking about employment, creating new jobs and creating new jobs that meet people where they are
Where they
without
are.
solving all of the, whether it's higher education needs or other things, and then providing economic opportunity
Right.
for people to contribute.
Yeah, if a mother is worried about how she's going to put food on the table, she really doesn't care about making it to her next doctor's appointment.
Mhm.
Her economic need is front and center before her health or public health need. And so I felt like I could do something to address that. We'll get back to the health issue.
Mhm.
But again, the point is, it's about doing what you can in the space that you occupy. That could be something as simple as talking about what getting the vaccine meant to you,
Mhm.
or what following the social distancing guidelines and some of the other COVID precautionary measures did for you and your family. It might convince someone else to do the same.
Great. Dr. Ziki, are you already thinking about beyond the pandemic? Is it possible? Should we be thinking beyond the pandemic and beginning to rebuild?
No, absolutely. And I think that rebuilding starts with really the addressing the mental health. I mean, we've all been part of this mass casualty exercise that has been real life, and it's been the longest type of traumatic event that most people have endured, whether it's actual loved ones lost versus livelihoods lost versus just the fear that you would lose your livelihood or your loved one. Like no one has been immune from this event. And I think there's a lot of trauma. I know I was very concerned about our team who was doing the work 24/7 and dealing with the actual effects of, in their personal lives, in their home lives, and saying like, what are we going to do for the team to deal with this? I was kind of pulling on the airplane message speech where, in the event of a change in cabin pressure, put your oxygen mask on before you tend to help others. And so one of the things that we did early on was, secure funding and say, we are going to make mental health services available for our team. I know all of us have insurance, but figuring out how to go through it and get a mental health counselor. I said, we are going to have a contracted team of mental health specialists that are available for us. Like, you don't have to, reach out to your insurance. Here are the people that are available. Call and set an appointment, take advantage of this. And then after that, we extended it to the local health department leaders to say, I know you have similarly been traumatized. We've put our oxygen mask on, we want to share it. So I think really thinking about how we are going to deal with, respond, recover from the trauma is an important step that we have to do before we can even go on to doing a lot of other work.
Yeah, I think that's great. And in terms of the mental health issues, and we have some mental health leaders in this audience in the area of Chicago. That is another thing that I think has become, we've removed some stigma in terms of talking about the issues. I certainly know from the AMA perspective, we've been talking about physician burnout prior to the pandemic. And then, my goodness, for the past 2 years, the levels of just we're beyond heroism, I think, and I think there's burnout. Maybe Dr. Bailey, your thoughts of what is it going to take to rebuild, from what has happened during the course of this pandemic?
Well, I think it's important for us, and I'm just going to talk about the practice of medicine in general, to look at the pandemic, even though it's not over yet. Our health system has been changed forever. And I think we need to look and see, okay, what do we need to keep? What do we need to toss? And what can we just, tweak and learn how to do differently? Telemedicine, that genie, I hope, is out of the bottle. And hopefully Congress will make it permanent so that we'll always be able to offer that type of care to our patients. And because patients love it, and I think every specialty and every practice will find its own ratio of face-to-face to hybrid visits. But I think that has the potential to reach, people in underserved areas, whether that be urban or rural. And so I think that we've got to make sure that telemedicine persists. I think that we've learned a lot about personnel and space, about how many people we really need in an office, who really needs to be there, who can do it remotely, in terms of your workforce. How much real estate do you really need? Hope there aren't any realtors in here, because sorry.
Depends on the type of real
housing
estate
market.
we're talking about.
But yeah, the housing market's great. The commercial real estate, maybe not so much, because people have realized they don't necessarily have to be in the office. The need for personal protective equipment, that we have to, we can't wait for shipments from overseas anymore. We have to learn how to stockpile it in our own practices, in our local communities and our states, and be able to access it, and fix that part of the supply chain. Most people didn't weren't familiar with the term supply chain before the pandemic, and now we all know how incredibly important that really is. And just in general, shoring up our public health system, so that it doesn't continue on this, seesaw of getting lots of attention and hopefully more money during a pandemic. And then when things are not so critical, you kind of get forgotten. And, we must maintain a vibrant public health system. And as I think the pandemic has shown, nothing else works if you don't.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Awadi, your thoughts? I mean, just again, from a recovery standpoint, what are the things we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, listening to my colleagues, all of these are such huge long-term conversations. When I take it back to Chicago specifically, even before COVID, the Chicago Department of Public Health had made a commitment that we were going to focus, not just as a health department, but as health partners, and many of you were part of this in Healthy Chicago 2025, on the racial life expectancy gap here in Chicago, where Black Chicagoans, even before COVID, lived 9 years less long than white Chicagoans. And we've seen the biggest drops in Latinx Chicagoans. We've seen drops in Asian American Chicagoans, every racial and ethnic group except white Chicagoans seeing dropping life expectancy. And I think during COVID, there are, not just supply chain, but the term essential worker has come to mean something different. The term, recognizing the choices that people have and do not have in their lives because of economic opportunity, because of their race, ethnicity, because of their education. And public health has always thought like this, right? If you look at that 9-year gap, half of it here is chronic diseases. It's cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancer outcomes, and some of that is about access to healthcare, but more of it is about access to the healthy food and the safe spaces and all of these pieces, which this room knows. But I feel like as a city, how we take these lessons of COVID and actually turn them into commitments to work on inequities is going to be how well we do. There's things to do at the national level. I want to see everybody have sick pay, right? Like at all levels. But for Chicago, we were supposed to launch Healthy Chicago 2025 in March of 2020. That clearly didn't happen. But when we finally, things had calmed down a little bit, got around to September to launch it, we didn't have to change one word based on what we'd seen on COVID, thinking about what were the gaps, what were the needs. We use COVID as an example. And I think some of the places that I'm the most proud of CDPH and sort of the city's response was where we said, how do we think not just about what do we need tomorrow, but how do we think about these larger issues? So there was a lot of pressure to, hire contact tracers very quickly, right? Lots of pressure. We were getting a lot of, why don't you have 800 contact tracers? We didn't want to hire a bank of contact tracers in some other state or we hired 800 Chicagoans with no educational requirement through the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership and through 30 community-based organizations on the South and West sides, because those are the folks who are gonna become our community health workers. Those are the folks who, if we can sustain the investment in public health that goes beyond here's Ebola, have some money. Here's Zika, have some money. Here's COVID, have some money, and says, how do you build an infrastructure? Yes, it's the stuff. And Suzette and her team had done a beautiful job of, we had PPE here, thank God, in ways that so many cities didn't. But we didn't have that human infrastructure, that community-based. And that has been the strength of our response here, pulling together all of the different groups, thinking about how you fund that work and then how you work on these big issues. So we're trying to take some of the lessons from COVID to violence here in Chicago, because we have to. We have to.
Well, some of those issues, so we're talking about workforce, we're talking about economic recovery, giving people jobs and access to that, so then we can focus on health. We're talking about adopting of technology. We're talking about using new solutions that we learned from COVID that will help sustain. And we're also talking about moving upstream in terms of, some of the largest health issues really are about moving upstream. Food, housing, those types of things. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience just so that we have time for people to ask questions. And, as if the pandemic were not enough, we are now in a global democracy crisis. We have a Ukraine crisis going on. We know we will see a humanitarian crisis. I want to just ask you about, what are the lessons of leadership? What is your advice for President Zelensky? What is the humanitarian things that we should be thinking about? And as leaders, how do you think about that? Just impact, any things that you want to share with our audience. I'm just going to go right down the line again.
I don't know if I necessarily have advice for President Zelensky. I do have advice for American citizens. And, I'll preface this by saying, I sit on the Science and Security Board for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. So for any of you who have heard of the Doomsday Clock, I sit on the board that sets the time on the Doomsday Clock. And I've been on that board for 6 years. And every single year, we issue what we call our clock statement. When we set the time, we issue a statement, and we include all of the factors that went into the time that we put on the clock that year. And we always view essentially world catastrophe from 3 lenses: climate change, the possibility of nuclear war, and emerging threats, which includes biological hazards like COVID. And what we say every single year is that the purpose for us doing that is not to frighten people. It is to arm the American public with the data and the knowledge and the information that they need to understand how the issues occurring globally can impact you right at home, and take that data and that knowledge and that information and share it with your legislators and encourage them to do the right thing. And so my advice is for our citizens and our government to understand, learn, educate yourself about the data and the information about what's happening globally, and do the right thing. Because from where I sit, if we had done some of the right things, we would have been able to not necessarily allow this crisis to escalate to the point that it has.
That is a great set of comments. Thank you for that, Dr.
It's so
Ezeki.
profound. No, I think it really is, the message is not necessarily to the president of Ukraine, but really talking to young people. We need to really understand the ills and the evils of war. I think, now with social media and YouTube, you really get the real look. It's not all glamorized, like, oh, this is showing power when you can just go in and invade and take over. So really teaching young boys and girls, our future leaders, our future politicians, of the real effects of war and what it means to society. You think about all the public health dollars that will be coming in, and we'll be trying to create better infrastructure, the money coming into state, that you're building better roads, and with just one push of a button, you can destroy an important bridge that's a lifeline in the community. You can destroy a community where, just the destruction needs to be really heartfelt. People need to see it. And we really need to think about what are the other ways that we can deal with conflict? How do we actually do conflict resolution? There are strategies that we are not using enough. To Dr. McKinney's point, there are steps that you can see, had we done this going backwards, maybe we wouldn't be at this point. But understanding conflict resolution, how to avoid war, I think we need to drill that in kids, that that's the way we want to go, as opposed to thinking that shows of power and might is the only way that you can show that you're an effective leader.
Yeah, talking about these difficult issues and educating the young those are just great comments. Dr. Bailey.
My advice to President Zelensky would just be to stay alive, please. My advice to our country is it's circles back to that leadership question. And we are only as good a country as leaders that we elect in our democratic system. And it's important to make sure that your local leaders are who you want them to be, your state leaders, your national leaders, care about the primaries, care about city council races, care about, maybe down ballot elections that some people don't pay much attention to. Because, if we do not have the leadership that we need to protect our country and to be good citizens of the world, it's nobody's fault but ours.
Yeah, and I think that really resonates with the leadership begins early,
Yeah.
very, very early. Dr. Awadi.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the things that has really rung loudly for me watching this is the misinformation in the media, which of course I've thought a lot about in relation to vaccine and COVID, and sort of how hardened we've become ideologically. I think in large part because we are no longer often reading the same things, watching the same things, and increasingly getting this very partisan and often highly ideologically driven narrative. And I've been watching, what is Russia sort of putting into what, and, this isn't so much for the Ukraine at the moment, but I think broadly as a democracy, how we make sure we continue to sustain and support free press and even local journalism, which we have also lost a lot of during COVID and with the pandemic and even before, and that information drives belief. And, I feel so much responsibility to share the right information myself. And I'm not politically driven in doing that, but making sure that sort of as a globe, we lift up voices that are based on true information and continue to make sure that dissent is part of what we read and what we consume. It's a long-term worry, I think. And we are obviously such a global world. I mean, there's nothing like a pandemic to remind people of that.
This is such profound comments. We have a couple minutes. I'd love to invite the audience if there are questions for any of our panel members or the panel in general. Just please, we have a microphone. If we could just open up the floor, please. Right over here. And if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, Sumi Petrotto with the American Medical Association. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of your insights. My question is around healing. The AMA recently did a segment on healing the healer. If you don't mind sharing some of your experiences and how you care about your own healing and how you've engaged and re-energized yourself, because I think that's an important concept that we've seen throughout here today, that would be great.
Great. Dr. Awadi, we'll go down this way.
Sure. So for me, always it's the opportunity to feel connected to other people, whatever that looks like. So that's been, colleagues across the country commiserating about the fact we have to have police cars outside our house, or it's, getting together with my own friends and family and making the time for that. I have a lot of things I used to do prior to COVID, as I'm sure many of you did. And I sort of judge how well we're doing as a city, whether I have time to do that. So I will tell you, I'm very pleased to be back in a pottery class again.
Oh, I am not a good person to ask this. One of my hobbies, but it's also therapy for me, is that I sing in my church choir. And they're my friends, they're my colleagues. It's a very accomplished choir. We do a lot of major works. And when you're singing in a group like that, you can't worry about, if you took the trash out, or if you've really got that paper ready for the next day, or the speech you're going to give. You've got to focus on your tone and your diction and your pitch, and making sure that you're following the conductor. And it's a very spiritual thing for me. And our choir didn't sing for 18 months. And we did a few of those things that you may have seen where, everybody, sings and sends a clip in, and then they put it all together on the screen. It was fun to look at the finished project, but doing it was pure terror because, I'm not a soloist. I'm used to being surrounded by 50 of my best friends. So I've just now been able to do that again, and that has kind of helped to feed my soul. But I've just made a focus, and I've joked about it. It's only half joking that I'm the only AMA president in history that slept in their own bed every night, that drank out of their favorite coffee mug every morning, and never forgot their toothbrush. Because I didn't go anywhere. I didn't travel. And so I really just cherished, even though I hated not being able to travel, I tried to remind myself on a regular basis what a privilege it was to have a warm bed and a nice hot cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah, I think the social connection we've talked about is so important. And so even when we're trying to live out our faith and do that, through traditional worship services, and doing it by Zoom is not the same as when you can come into the house of the Lord and be able to convene and lay hands on each other and really feel the Spirit all together. So that is a great thing that I'm able to do now. I know that I feel better when I sleep better. So I've just recently my husband just hooked up our bed to this sleep tracker, so that now I can see how many minutes of sleep, how many times I woke up, what my average heart rate was, and how much REM sleep I got, and did I get the requisite 25% of my sleep in REM sleep. And, really seeing that, how poorly I've been sleeping, and just over the last week, I'm seeing the numbers start to improve, and also seeing the connection between, when I do get a vigorous workout. For some people, that's a problem. For me, that helps me get a much better sleep. And so really just trying to make sure that I'm doing the things that will allow me to connect with people, that will allow me to tire out my physical body so I can get a better sleep, and be able to, live out my faith in its fullest. All of those that are very rejuvenating to me.
So for me, I should work on my sleep. But what's affecting my sleep now is just I am obsessed with Wordle. And I am literally waking up in the middle of the night like, oh, I'm going to do this word.
This morning. What was up with that
I
word?
know. Well, I did my Wordle at 12:01 last night.
Yes.
But the things that I do, I also work out. I have a trainer who is insane, but I go at 6 a.m. 2 or 3 times a week. Also the social interaction and connection with my friends. I just love getting together with my friends. And, the other thing that I am now able to do, I have a daughter who's 20 years old, and she is a kick-ass water polo player. So she goes to Villanova. I was able to travel to California this weekend to watch her and her team play in a water polo tournament. And even though it was cold and raining in California and we were spectators at an outdoor pool, I was just so happy
Mm-hmm.
to be sitting there watching my kid play again. Because part of the challenge of COVID is her team couldn't travel and play. She was in school on campus, but they couldn't go and play. And for the local games that they did play, no spectators were allowed. So just being able to go and watch her play again. I've been watching my daughter compete since she was 6 years old, and the pandemic took that away. But now it's back.
Yeah, there's just some normalcy in
Yeah.
some of these comments. I said we would be done on time, and everyone is busy. So if we could just like come down the line again as we close out this amazing panel, profound comments, excellent comments. It's International Women's Day. Your best advice for women for the 2022, 30 seconds or less. Dr. Arwady, start with you.
Oh, I mean, just know that the things you know are needed in this world, and that your experience is yours, and you can and should stand up and bring people along with you for the things you care about.
I guess my advice would be to be intentional, to not be afraid to set, big, hairy, audacious goals. I never did like that phrase, but big goals, and go for it. Don't be afraid to just go for it.
Yeah. I would say, a lot of times we talked about being the first or the only in whatever space, but we have to be very intentional about, once we get in there and are the first or the only, leave that door open and actually physically bring somebody in behind, so that we can get to the second and the third and the fourth, and get to the point where it's not a thing that this woman is in leadership, because we've got to normalize our status. We need to be there. We know that. So let's be part of the solution to bring more people in. And that includes supporting women, being honest with our fellow women about how you succeed at those highest levels, to know that there are pitfalls. Like, you will miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. It's okay to miss, to try and miss. It's not okay to not even take that shot. And so creating that pipeline, nurturing and mentoring women so that we can backfill ourselves, that's super important.
Yep. So I agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said. They've said it very profoundly. So I think I'll touch on something that you and I talked about, and that is, remember that just because you're in the space and you're excelling, you can also help make room for another woman to do the same. And if you can't make room for her, you don't have to put her down. There is enough woman-on-woman crime happening out here. None of you need to participate in that. So be you, do you, but make space for someone else, because what's the phrase?
Queen bee.
Yeah, we don't have to engage in that queen bee, but the rising the tide raises all boats. That's what I was looking for. It doesn't diminish you to help another woman.
These are such great comments. And before Megan comes up here to close us out, please join me in thanking this incredible esteemed panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Lori for leading us today and with all our preceding discussions. It's been such a pleasure to work with Lori and to have so many women that have joined us in this series. And this is just the beginning. I think that will continue to its work in other forms, and what that will be, we'll see. If you want to join us again at HC3 events and other programs, please just visit our website. Otherwise, you are free to go. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you all so much for being here.